Marxism 105, How Marx Arrived at Materialism. So, how did Marx decide upon a materialist conception of dialectical history? We may answer that by investigating the analysis of history made by the German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, and of the philosophers who came after him. Hegel argued that human society possesses a spirit, and this spirit develops its consciousness, freedom and realization of that freedom through the process of world history. One might say that Hegel believed less developed societies in human history, such as the Paleolithic, to be further away from freedom, and more modern societies to be closer to freedom. Hegel proclaimed, world history is the record of the spirit's efforts to attain knowledge of what it is in itself. The Orientals do not know that the spirit or man as such are free in themselves, and because they do not know that, they are not themselves free. The consciousness of freedom first awoke among the Greeks, and they were accordingly free, but, like the Romans, they only knew that some, and not all men as such, are free. The Germanic nations, with the rise of Christianity, were the first to realize that all men are by nature free, and that freedom of spirit is his very essence. Clearly this concept is rife with Christian and Germanocentrism, but nonetheless was a powerful notion amongst the German philosophers of the time. Hegel influenced many of his students into the belief that the Prussian state, being the most fully Christian in his eyes, was the height of freedom. Those who believed in this were known as the Right Hegelians, or Old Hegelians. Many younger philosophers at the time, however, found this to be an irrational notion. The Christian state only limited freedom, and Prussia was hardly as advanced in terms of civil society as Britain. Not only was Prussia practically backwards, but the notion that Christianity represented the highest objective truth and freedom was heavily criticized by the young Hegelians. The first was David Strauss, who argued that it is most likely that Christianity arose as a result of contradictions existing within Jewish society at the time, such as the destruction of the temple. He argued that the Gospels were originally used to give hope to the poor and downtrodden in Judea, but was later manipulated by the Roman and now Prussian state to convince the poor not to rebel. Bruno Bauer argued even further, citing the fact that there are no historical records of a historic Jesus, and that Christianity may have been directly created for the express purpose of Roman power. To elaborate, Ludwig Feuerbach wrote in The Essence of Christianity, that the poor masses are further oppressed by being made to believe in fantasies like God, and are thus being fooled out of awareness of the material shortcomings which they would otherwise recognize a need to fight for, perhaps turning Hegel's thesis entirely on its head. Christian Prussia's very basis was the contradiction of freedom, not the essence of freedom itself. All of these views seem to be in agreement, and Arnold Ruge organized the newspaper Hallische Jahrbucher to argue that in order for Hegel's vision to be realized, Prussia must become liberalized, as opposed to the old Hegelian notion that Prussia is already free and needs no more liberalization. On the ground they organized what became known as the Doctors' Club, where they discussed the ways in which Prussia might move closer to ideals of republicanism. Thus we see in general that the young Hegelian thesis is the following. Practical power is established over the masses through the agency of religious ideology. This ideology enslaves the masses. Thus, in order to attain freedom, the religious state must be undermined. This is the point at which one young Hegelian, named Karl Marx, disagreed. Marx wrote his disagreements in the book The German Ideology in 1846. Before the German ideology, Marx, for the most part, agreed with the young Hegelians. The book, however, was never published, but is key in understanding why Marx broke off with the young Hegelians. Fundamentally, Marx explained that it is irrational to believe that religious ideology is the source of practical power. In this sense, the young Hegelians are styled idealists. They believe that static ideas and writings influence the world which daily changes, where it is plainly obvious, if one makes any observations about the world, that this is not apparent. Furthermore, Marx finds their idea that an individual's self-reference is made purely based upon an intercourse of ideas to be ridiculous, as these ideas are only made available with the advent of different material conditions, and whilst ideology may make up the superstructure of an epoch, it is not the ideology which creates the epoch. It is actual human material action which creates and defines an epoch through evolution. But more on this later. let's see some witty remarks which Marx makes to argue this point. Principles ousted one another, heroes of the mind overthrew each other with unheard of rapidity, and more of the past was swept away in Germany than at other times in 3 centuries. All this is supposed to have taken place in the realm of pure thought. The dominance of religion was taken for granted. Gradually every dominant relationship was pronounced a religious relationship and transformed into a cult of law, a cult of the state, etc. The young Hegelians are in agreement with the old Hegelians in their belief in the rule of religion, of concepts, of a universal principle in the existing world. Only, the one party attacks this dominion as usurpation, while the other extols it as legitimate. Since the young Hegelians consider conceptions, thoughts, ideas, in fact all the products of consciousness, to which they attribute an independent existence, as the real chains of men, just as the old Hegelians declared them the true bonds of human society. It is evident that the young Hegelians have to fight only against these illusions of consciousness. Since, according to their fantasy, the relationships of men, all their doings, their chains and their limitations are products of their consciousness. It has not occurred to any one of these philosophers to inquire into the connection of German philosophy with German reality, the relation of their criticism to their own material surroundings. The production of ideas, of conceptions, of consciousness, is at first directly interwoven with the material activity and the material intercourse of men, the language of real life. In direct contrast to German philosophy which descends from heaven to earth, here we ascend from earth to heaven. That is to say, we do not set out from what men say, imagine, conceive, nor from men as narrated, thought of, imagined, conceived, in order to arrive at men in the flesh. We set out from real, active men, and on the basis of their real-life process we demonstrate the development of the ideological reflexes and echoes of this life process. If in all ideology men and their circumstances appear upside down as in a camera obscura, this phenomenon arises just as much from their historical life process as the inversion of objects on the retina is from their physical life process. Marx sure has a lot to say. But now we can't see where Marx gets the notion that history is not based upon ideas or ideologies, but rather upon material conditions. For example, it is plainly obvious that Paleolithic man does not differentiate himself from animals by ideologies, but rather by the fact that he can materially provide for his own production of the means of subsistence. And further, in more complex societies, the historical differentiation of epochs can only be made not upon ideas which may continue from one to the other, but rather upon the new forms of production. We can also see a correlation between advance to the future and division of labor. The closer to the present we are, the more the production process is divided. Thus we see that the base of social development is the means of production. So does ideology play no role in the existence of society? Yes, it does. It is the superstructure which serves to justify whatever injustice is required for the base to continue existing. It is not the superstructure which changes society, however. A superstructure with no base is impossible. But a base may have little to no superstructure, though this is unlikely. Except in communism.